Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got another disassembly video for you, this time of the Graham Razel Midtech GMT. I'm a big fan of this. This was one of my first really high-end knives and one of my first Midtechs, and I still like it a whole lot. So I figured I'd show you how to take it apart, and it's been a little while, so here we go. Let's take a look here. And again, my apologies. This is going to be a little less smooth and scripted than most of my videos, because it's unscripted and single take, and also apologies for the finger. Poison ivy is a terrible thing. So let's go on ahead and pop this open. Come on now. Another thing to note is that on most of your Graham Midtechs, you're not going to have this little San Mai backspacer. I'm sorry, it's not San Mai. Sorry, Cold Steel, don't sue me. They are trying to assert that they have a claim over the term San Mai, which is hundreds of years old in Japanese. But anyways, most Razels don't have this San Mai backspacer. That is a special custom sort of affair that I had done by John Graham Jr. John Graham, the creator of the Razels, kid. And he does great work, and so that's unusual. One thing that's going on in this particular knife is that the backspacer, the pivot screw is actually... you need to have a tool on both sides. Basically, it's a free spinning pivot. And so what I'm doing here, I'm trying to do at least, is... This is a second little torque set that I keep around just for this. The bits aren't great. I don't trust them not to strip screws, but at the same time, they work just fine for stabilizing the other half. So hopefully you can see kind of what I'm doing here. It's a little bit of a hand exercise, some dexterity work here. There we go. Got that popped open. Now, very carefully, because the blade is now spinning around freely, I'm going to take this out and disassemble the rest of the knife. I'm not going to take the other half of the backspacer out, because it's fine as it is. And if you can always avoid unscrewing something, you should avoid unscrewing it, just because you don't want to run the risk of stripping the blade. So here we see the inside of the knife, and it's, like I said, this is absolutely bone simple. You've got a pivot right here. You have your two sets of bearings, and they are captive bearings, so, and very small for the size of the knife overall, but they work. So there you go, there are your bearings. They're a little grody, so I'm glad we're getting in here. It's good. And then your blade and your stop pin, and that's pretty much it. So I'm going to go ahead and do some cleaning here. I'm spraying a little bit of Simple Green onto the paper towel here. And before I do anything else, what I'm going to do is just run the bearings around a little bit on that Simple Green. And all that that's doing is cleaning all sides of the bearings. And now I'm running them over to a clean portion of the paper towel, which will help to dry them off a little bit and clear them off. So that bearing is now clean. Yeah, and see, they stick to your finger, so that means they're full of oil and grease. And so we'll re-oil them in a bit here. There we go. Much better. Beautiful. Bearings are now clean. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing for your pivot, which is another area that tends to attract grease because, well, you're putting grease on it. So there we go. And I'm going to clean the stop pin, which is another thing that tends to attract some grodiness on your titanium frame locks. Come on now. And all I'm trying to do here is to rub this against the cloth, well, in this case, paper towel. Now that I've got those components, I'll just wipe out the bearing race a little bit on the actual scales themselves. You can see here the bearings have, after a while of use, worn out a nice little race in there, a little track. So that's good. I like that. And it's not always the case, by the way, and it doesn't need to be, that titanium knives have a stainless bearing race. That's unnecessary. So, there you go. I'm going to wipe out this side of things. So what you see in here, this black grease, is actually antiox. Let me grab my tube of it. It's over here. Oh, come on now. You hold on just 1 second. Wow. Oh, it's because it's right under my nose. It's this stuff. And that stuff I've mentioned before in Nick's Quick Tip, but it is magical because it eliminates lock stick. It is very, very nice in that particular way. So, yeah, that's what I'm using here, and I'm using it on the surface of the lock bar here. And that really does help to eliminate the lock stick and just to make the whole thing run a whole lot nicer. Because that is the biggest fault that this guy has, the Razel GMT. That is that it has a lot of lock stick. And unfortunately, when you apply this guy on a knife that is already assembled, you end up getting some of that anti-ox everywhere, and that really does affect the action. Because it's kind of a greasy thing. See, you can see it on the blade tang there. Clean the blade tang off a little bit, particularly the lock bar face. And there you go. You can see the lock bar wear a little bit as well here. There's not a whole lot, but there it is. So now the blade is cleaned, which is beautiful. Are there any other parts of this that need love? You know? No, not really. So at this point, everything is cleaned up. We can go ahead and put things back together. Alrighty, very first step that I think I'm going to take here is to apply a little bit more of the ox guard on here, just because, honestly, this knife without it is not so beautiful. So instead of just trying to squirt it on there, what I'm going to do is use this little guy as an oiler. So I put a little bit of the sludge out on this. That's maybe a little bit much. Grab my paper towel and reduce the overall amount. There we go. And now I'm going to find the lock bar face right here. And I'm just going to rub it right onto the area where the lock bar contacts the blade. Trying very hard to apply enough that it's there, but not so much that it'll goop everywhere and get all up on the detent track and things like that. So there's that. I'm going to go ahead and clean off my little oiler, which is a watch spring bar tool, as always. And then I'm going to very carefully make a pass in this direction that will eliminate, there we go, any of the anti-ox that has kind of crawled up onto the side here. And hopefully that'll reduce the amount that gets into the detent ball area. So we're done with the anti-ox now. That'll really help to cut down on the lock stick. Generally that'll happen over time, but here, just because I know it can be a problem, I've decided against it. Or I've decided to keep doing it, just in case. There we go, cleaned out the bearing race. Now I'm going to go ahead and reassemble the knife. For this guy, you know, I'm actually going to use a little bit of a heavier lube on this, just because it's a bigger knife and this is more for hard use, and so it experiences a little more stress. And also, I don't need the action to be as finicky, if you will, as drop shutty as like on your Shirogorov Neons and things like that. So I'm using here the 85 weight nano oil. If you just have the 10 weight, that would work fine. Another thing that works good here is the frog lube, which works well as a lubricant as well. So I'm just going to apply a little bit more over here so I don't forget that part. There we go. And bearings usually go with the open side facing downwards. I'm going to go ahead and drop the pivot in here. And for the pivot, I'm actually, well, there. Pivot, I'm actually going to use the 10 weight. Not that everything isn't going to mix together tomorrow, but that just makes me feel better. And at the end of the day, isn't that what matters? So we're going to apply a little bit to the pivot here. A little tiny bit. And just kind of use the applicator needle tip here to spread it around. That's half the reason I like the needle tip on the applicator. Beautiful thing. So there you go. Now I'm going to drop the pivot, the stop pin right back in here. And it is dropped. I am going to lubricate the blade path, and the detent ball path. So here we go. Looks about good. So I'm going to put a nice dollop of the heavyweight nano oil here and just try and put a nice little stretch of it there. That's way over lubricating it, but this guy's okay running wet. I don't necessarily use it for food prep. And like I said, the blade is heavy enough that I can afford a little bit of slowdown to get good lubrication going on. Alrighty. I'm going to be very careful because the blade on this guy is rather sharp. And I'm going to drop the blade in. Sometimes, in order for this to work at all, you need to kind of press the lock bar down for it to fall in. Really depends on the knife. So the bearings are already greased. I'm going to use a couple of more drops of the nano oil right here. Now I'm going to slip this guy back on there. And sometimes, on a knife like this, there can be a little bit of trouble popping the pivot back on there. Let's get this kind of zoomed in. And so often it's just a question of kind of squeezing as you manipulate various parts of the knife until something kind of gives. Now what I'm doing is I'm looking down from the top just to make sure that there's nothing seriously amiss and that there are no gaps, that, for instance, the bearings haven't fallen out or anything like that. Come on now. And part of this is just the lock bar tension on this is very high. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the bearing there. There we go. Drop it in there. And be careful with a situation like this, because the knife blade is in play. It's not adequately covered here. So we can leave that there. What I'm actually going to go ahead and do right now then, given that this has given me a little bit of trouble, is I'm going to start the process of inserting the pivot screw. I use a little bit of Loctite here, not too much. I'm just applying it directly onto the screw. Hopefully you can see. And very carefully, holding this down, I'm going to drop the pivot screw in there. Come on now. And I'm just trying to thread it in there. There we go. We're threaded. And unfortunately, I've now committed myself to using my wrong hand, but that's okay. And of course, the pivot screw is free spinning. Such is life. And right now, the issue I'm running into, there we go, is that my stop pin had fallen out of alignment. Whoa there. And it continues to do so periodically. There we go. That's popped in. I'm going to use this opportunity to crank this down a little bit more. Isn't the final down cranking? It's something. All right. So now that I've got things roughly in alignment, I'm going to do the back screws here. And again, I'm just going to use a little smidge of Loctite just to keep these guys in there. I probably do a lot more Loctiting than I need to. But, you know, I've lost screws before just from everyday living, and it's no good. Especially when they are for some kind of an obscure knife that you're not going to be able to find screws for again. I mean, if it's a ZT, you call ZT and they send you screws, but, you know, something foreign, something custom, well, it's a little bit more of a pain in the neck, although most custom makers stand by their product. Come on now. Alas, sometimes I just give up and I hold the screw with some tweezers to kind of steady it and then drop it in there. That's always the better approach, but I try to be fast and lazy. There we go. And now that's threaded in there. Everything looks about good. Lock those two in there. Good. So now the final step is going to be to get our pivot back into the right tension. Remember, free spinning pivot, so unfortunately we have to pull out our second driver again. Gonna lock that in there, steady the knife butt against the table, and start the turn. Alrighty. So that's maximum tension right here. And indeed, there's no blade play at all. And the action is fairly smooth. What I'm going to go ahead and do is back it up just slightly. Come on now. There we go. Drop shot. So there you go. That is your Graham Razel Midtech disassembly reassembly. I hope this has been interesting to you, and have yourself an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.